Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Steps to Soul podcast. Today, I have my co-host Chris Sater and a special guest of ours, George Wellmer, founder and CEO of Tupelo, a proprietary software company specializing in CRMs for business brokers. And he's got some great insights for you buyers out there looking to connect with us and other potential sellers. So, first off, in a market where hundreds of buyers inquire on listings, why don't only a select few actually close deals? I think that's one of the most common representations people see out there from influencers and other groups, like how to get deals done, right? I think we've all heard that a couple times. We're going to talk about what's going on there, what separates serious buyers, high quality buyers, and just the classic tire kickers and cash flow chasers. We're going to talk about how buyers can stand out to us and to sellers, and then also tips for buyers to increase their chances of closing the right deal, whether that's making the right connection, using the right starting point, all those metrics. So to start off, I'm going to let George introduce himself, talk about Tupelo, and give you all a quick insight to why he is our special guest today. George, have at it.
Thanks, Brandon. Thanks, Chris. Excited to be here. I'm the founder of Tupelo. We're a software that works with SMB M&A transactions, predominantly business brokers. On any given week, we're processing close to 10,000 inquiries from buyers. So we really see what buyers are doing to stand out and get those meetings with brokers and, deals across the finish line.
Absolutely. You're a great person to talk to. So with that insight, let's kind of talk about the reality of the buyer pool. I think that's something that can be very different based on what size businesses are available and kind of shift in the last 5 to 10 years on the buyers entering the market. Most inquiries never turn into anything, or especially an LOI or even an offer or even a meeting. And, brokers like us, as you know, you're filing 10,000 inquiries to guys like us, George. We get countless number. I know Chris can testify. When you get the right business, you can have 200, 300, 400 inquiries on a single listing. That's a lot of people to beat out to get attention if you're a buyer, to talk to a seller, even the broker. So I guess, George, let's talk a little bit about, on the base level, how many inquiries you're handling. Let's see here. What do you really think is the most important thing, step one, a buyer should do? If you're going to say you found a listing inquiry on BizBuySell or any other platform, even Tupelo's website that advertises all our listings as well. What's the most important thing you think they should start off with when they send that first inquiry in?
Yeah, I mean, we can even go before the first inquiry is ever sent by a buyer. I think the first thing all buyers should do is really understand the market of SMB M&A type transactions.
That's a great point.
Like, just on a macroeconomic scale here, like there's millions and millions of small businesses. And the smaller the businesses are, the more businesses they are in that space. So if you come at us and you're saying you're looking for a business that's doing $1 million in EBITDA, that really limits the pool of potential prospects that we could present to you. And there's tons and tons of good businesses out there that are smaller than that. So understanding the market just from like an economic standpoint of like how many businesses are in the small business pool versus like the lower middle market and then much bigger from that. I mean, you guys can test to that too, like out of how many of your listings are going to be, $20 million versus, sub 5 million. The vast majority will probably be sub 5 million and not north of 20 million. Next thing is understand like what type of business you want to buy and why. If you're an agnostic buyer, that's totally fine, I guess, but you should be hot on some specific industries, particularly industries that you can provide value to if and when you take ownership of that business. I always tell buyers that they should write down a paragraph or two, and after they request an NDA or request more information about the business, explaining to the business broker of why you're the proper person to buy that business, what value add you can bring to the table there. And the third thing I tell buyers to do before they even sign an NDA or do anything like that or inquire upon listings is understand how much money they can spend to buy the business.
That is so true.
Yeah, we all have financial constraints in life, and buying a business is not free. You can't buy a business with no money. So understanding how much money you have to deploy to acquire one of these businesses. So understand the market is number one. Number two, understand what type of industries or verticals that you can provide a significant amount of value to. And then number three is understanding how you're going to buy this business and how much money you have.
Excellent points. And I think you made a great point there about writing the paragraph. And I think I'll let Chris attest to this a little bit. Nothing's worse than seeing a random inquiry saying, please send DA and SIM. Like, If that's your entire outreach to the broker, all you're saying is, I've done this 4,000 times and I just want to see a sim. You're not even interested in what makes that business tick, why it's a fit. And Chris, I'll let you talk a bit. Every business is different. Every even $1 million EBITDA company is so different. When you see the words "please send NDA and SIM," what's the first thing that comes to your mind, Chris?
Well, two things. It depends where it comes from. So if it comes from a email with a domain name that I go check out and they've got 30 to 100 businesses under their portfolio, great. That's all you need to send. I get it. That's all you want to do. If you send it from your Gmail account, better add a lot of backup depending on the size of the business. If you're inquiring about my $10 million manufacturer and you're inquiring from your Gmail account, I'm going to need a lot of context why you should be looking at this business, especially if
Mm-hmm.
you're, I can't search you on Google and find out a little bit about you and see anything. Then I'm going to send out my email that says, hey, I need to know about your industry experience, your financial. I'm going to need to see a pre-approval letter from your bank. I have
Mm-hmm.
no context of who you are, and I'm not going to send you my clients' tax returns, P&Ls, and all that information on them without understanding where you're coming from.
That's so true. And George, I think you can make a great add-on to this. Y'all create a buyer profile on Tupelo. Maybe tie into that because that's a great point, Chris. Domain name matters, but providing information, George.
Yeah. So in addition to like Tupelo automating NDAs, we also automate the sending of a buyer profile. So
Mm-hmm.
inside of Tupelo, the seller brokers can create multiple buyer profiles and have it be for specific listings. So like what we see that happens often is for like service-based businesses that require a license to own the business. Think of like
Mm-hmm.
HVAC or plumbing, where you need to be a master plumber or a mechanical contractor. Like brokers are asking those questions in the buyer profile. So when a buyer inquires upon that listing, a buyer profile is sent to them pre-NDA, asking them, hey, are you certified to buy this business? If you're not certified to buy this business, what's
Mm-hmm.
your plan? Like, do you have a partner who didn't hit inquire with you? What's your plan to acquire this business? And then after you fill out that buyer profile, then you can sign the NDA and move forward into the process. But the broker, the seller of the business, needs to know before they even entertain speaking with you, how are you going to buy this business? Do you have enough money? Are you certified? Are you legally allowed to buy this business? And
That's
if you
right.
can't answer those two basic questions, like how, no one's going to give you time.
That's exactly right. No one's going to call you back, and I see buyers get frustrated with that. But when you already put disqualifiers in your letter, you're telling that broker you go way down the list. One of the best things you talked about, right characteristics of a good buyer is being financially prepared. Part of that's going to SBA and getting pre-qualified. I mean, especially now with the new SOP changes, where before you could do an asset or a rollover, and the owner didn't have to be on full standby for the life of the loan if it's 20% or less to keep that license, like you said, in place if you don't have it yet. That's changed now. So if you don't even want to take those steps correctly, your chances of even wanting to buy that business are less than 1%, in my opinion, for a lot of buyers, because you've shown you're not financially prepared. You're not licensing wise, you're not ready. And three, any deal structure you're going to need is already changed because the SOP changes with the SBA that'll happen on June 1st. So, really great points. I think another thing I'll let you kind of touch on, George, is I know y'all have been getting more and more buyer input. And y'all kind of become almost kind of like not a consultant, but a messenger of good faith out there to the buyer community. Like, hey, I talk to brokers every day. I see what they're asking me to implement into Tupelo to make their lives more efficient. So you kind of get the insights into our back end of what we need to be done. Maybe a great tool for y'all to talk about is, we talked about a buyer profile in our last, podcast, what good buyers should do. Is there a specific email you've seen going around from the searchers that you say, guys, cut the generic script. Let's fix that. Because you're just sending out, 500 to 1.5 million EBITDA. I'm agnostic. Talk a little bit. You hit on that point earlier, but I want to get back to that because for all the searchers out there who went to Harvard MBA or whatever MBA you got, listen to George here because he's going to tell you how to fix that mass email every single broker like Chris and I get 5 to 10 times a day and why it doesn't work.
Yeah. So like first, when you're highlighting a specific EBITDA range that everyone knows that we outlined is like a very small percentage of businesses that are being for sale right now in the market.
Mm-hmm.
Like that signals to the seller of the business, i.e. the brokers, that you haven't done your research and understanding the market. the first thing that I said the buyer should do is understand the market. There's many, many more, millions more small businesses than they are in these like lower middle market that they're being branded as. So I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't lead with that. I would talk about these are the industries that I'm interested in, and then have a section on why. Why are you interested in those industries? Why do you want to buy this business, and why
Mm-hmm.
you are the right person to buy that business? And then ask the broker, do they have a buyer profile that you can fill out to get input into their system?
Mm-hmm.
So what we do for our customers is you can actually send out these emails to buyers, or if you get one of these generic emails from a searcher that has
Mm-hmm.
like their criteria and their website, or maybe they have a one pager, we're seeing brokers send an email back to them. Hey, fill out this buyer profile. You'll be added to my system. If we have something that meets your criteria, we'll let you know. Now, it's funny when these searchers or professional business buyers send those emails, because we get them too, saying that
Mm-hmm.
they're looking for businesses north of 750 in EBITDA or a million in EBITDA, and then I send them a buyer profile to fill out. That number that they're putting in their buyer profile that they're interested in is a heck of a lot lower than
Yep.
750 there. So I think, like, again, it goes back to what I said when I first got on, is like understand the market. Um, Pick some verticals that you're bullish on and you can provide value to, and then how much money do you have to buy these businesses?
That's right. And let's talk a little about this topic. You mentioned automated NDAs, and that's something that Chris and I use every day and makes our life a lot easier. But it requires two things from a buyer, whether you're a searcher, a private investor, even a group. And it may not apply always to equity groups for the financial portion, but I'll get to that. Let me ask you this, George. You know that we require a financial form and our NDA to go out for our group. What is the completion percentage of those you think that are sent out from Tupelo that buyers have found it in business, inquired on, and actually fully complete and send it back? Are you seeing a high retention, a low retention, or are you noticing kind of incomplete stuff and wondering why buyers might be saying, well, I didn't get a call back? Well, if you don't fill out a financial form, guess what? You're not a serious buyer. So what are the numbers you see there? How many do you think are actually really completing it and doing it the right way, for lack of
Yeah,
better
so
words?
this is kind of a tough question to answer, because not all brokers want to have that information be
Mm-hmm.
required to fill out. So how our system works, and how hundreds of brokers are using it, is the buyer profile goes out with the NDA. The
Yes.
buyer profile can include a PFS, personal financial statement,
Mm-hmm.
as well. And the broker can make these fields and the questions to be required or not required,
Mm-hmm.
or they can remove questions. So some of the brokers will include a PFS and they'll make it mandatory. Some of the brokers won't. So obviously, if they have the PFS and they make it mandatory, it's 100%, because the buyer can't move forward in the
Mm-hmm.
process. But if they're not making it mandatory, a lot of times buyers will just gloss over it. So I think that's more on the broker's
Mm-hmm.
responsibility. But at the end of the day, if it is mandatory and a buyer is not willing to fill out, like, hey, how much cash do you have to buy this business? They're not a real buyer.
I think that's very true. If you're looking to buy a business, I think Chris and I can attest to this. If you're not want to give us even a snapshot, and we're not asking for bank account numbers, guys, we're not trying to steal your identity, but you got to show us some kind of capacity to perform. You're asking to see someone's financials worth $2 to $5 million, and you can't even show a base idea what's in your wallet. What owner is going to want to authorize us to give you proprietary tax returns, P&Ls, have a conversation with them? Let me ask you this for your buyer pool and data. I know y'all are big on data. How many buyers do you see inquire on maybe even more than 10 or 20 different listings in your system? I find that to be a massive red flag. I know I'll let Chris touch on that in a minute too. When you see a buyer clicking on everything let's call them a cash flow chaser, right? 500 SDE, 500 EBITDA and up. Man, industry agnostic. You're sending all the wrong signals out there.
Yeah. So just from the sheer volume that we have, that's not the majority of inquiries that are coming
Mm-hmm.
through. Now, if a buyer has a thesis on, I want to buy a restaurant in Baton Rouge, right?
Yes.
And I'm I'm okay with the buyer, and maybe you guys think differently. I'm okay with the buyer having that criteria, and if it meets their financial criteria too, if they can afford the business, to go in and inquire upon multiple of
Yeah,
these
but that's one
businesses.
industry. I'm talking like agnostic. You're checking at restaurants, you're clicking at manufacturing, you're clicking on, automotive. You're not serious. Come on.
Yeah. I mean, I think that goes back to the problem of not understanding, like
Mm-hmm.
the point too of like, what industries are you going to provide value to?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, if I were to come across a buyer that was doing this and I would talk to them about it, I'd be like, how are your skill sets going to be transferable from, a clothing manufacturer to, a snow removal place? Like, what are you doing here? Like nobody is that big of a Swiss Army knife here.
No, I agree. Chris, let me ask you a quick question. We talk about, George mentioned having realistic expectations and about doing your homework. What would you tell a good buyer as far as homework wise to set up to prepare? Let's talk a little about, market price and understanding that the unicorns aren't real.
Well, you got two different factors. You got the broker. He probably told the client what their business was worth. And then in 99% of my deals, the client told me what he was willing to go out to the market and ask. It's never that they're going with my valuation. If I tell you your business is worth $2 million, the seller's easily going to say, well, let's go out and ask 2.5, 2.6, or that's where the conversation is going to lead to.
Yep.
It may not be that straightforward like that, but that's how it always gets there. So you need to understand that there is probably some negotiating room. But the brokers inform the seller of what the value of the company is. We're trying to hit high because I've never had a buyer come in and offer more than I'm asking. This is not a house in California during peak season. This is I don't see that very often. And I rarely have I've had 2 or 3 offers on a business at one time, but it's not to where we can play them off each other like a housing. I think in business, anytime you've got multiple offers, if you tell that other buyer you've got another offer that you're weighing against them, this is not a house. They don't want to, they back off the process immediately. Like, well, you finish that and let us know if you're wanting to negotiate. So back to your point of unicorns, there aren't unicorns out there. There are tech companies, and you probably want to go talk to investment bankers and get your $100 million ready to buy those unicorns. But in our business as business brokers, we don't see those. We see Main Street, middle market businesses that have a multiple of cash flow, and the way we come about it and the multiple, it's pretty straightforward. We've got comp to access. We can go look at that. We're coming from that advantage point of how we price the business. So be prepared for those multiples. You can come in with your own valuation if you're a seasoned buyer, and we can negotiate and dispute and go back and forth. But yeah, just kind of, I would take unicorns off the table until you're an Apple or Google in this world.
No, I think you make great points about negotiating value, and guys like George at Tupelo provide us with, software and ways to help do quick analysis as well. Most brokers now are getting better at pricing stuff. It doesn't mean that there aren't ones in deals that are just overpriced because of seller expectations, market trends. I mean, heck, you can look at Alaska, for example. You're seeing 10 times multiples for Main Street businesses because there's no one up there. You can't just go open a business in Alaska that easily. An HVAC, a plumbing. There are circumstances where that does make a difference. And
I think here too, Brandon, is multiples are people know what multiples are now. The average buyer,
true.
I would say, just because of the internet's availability,
yes,
can use even like ChatGPT to be like, what are multiples for this industry in this location, and they can have a range. So if you're a buyer and you're looking at a business and you think it's overpriced, like maybe they are selling for like a 12x multiple or something like that, but you're only seeing 6. Okay, that's fine. But if you're going to have any sort of negotiation, I think it's in the calculation of how SDE, seller discretionary earnings, was calculated. Because if you ask me versus you versus anyone else out there, the math behind it isn't, I would say, 100% real.
it's not perfect.
Yeah, it's not perfect. So like when you get to the point of doing due diligence, you're going to be looking at how that SDE number was calculated. And can you verify these add backs? So it's the same thing the brokers are doing during their due diligence when they're pricing the business and bringing the business to market. You're going to have to do when you're doing your due diligence to see if you want to move forward in that LOI. Now, it's totally fine that you come to a different SDE number, slightly different SDE number, or have different thoughts on how SDE is calculated. But just bringing that to the surface as a point of negotiation is a place to start, rather than attacking a broker over a multiple.
No, I think that's a great way to say it, George, because very often buyers just, I don't know why it's priced this way. Well, you've never talked to the seller. You don't know what their expectations are. And sometimes, very often, like Chris, we can talk to sellers and say, look, we believe the price is here. The seller may want here. We're happy to test the market for you at a higher point, but at some point you need to come back down to what we believe is a more realistic expectation to be sold. And often it's, is it even financeable? We talk about being pre-qualified for sellers all the time. Is there a spot on Tupelo where buyers can check that they've already been SBA pre-qualified, or which bank they've been pre-qualified with? Because that's something that if you've gone through that process as avoiding a red flag, that's one of the few things that tells a broker, hey, I've at least spoke to a banker. I've at least gotten some understanding of what these SBA rules are, and I know how to apply the working capital and funds that I have to go buy a business. Now, granted, anybody can get underwritten for $5 million, but at least I know you've done some homework. You've done some preparation before you decide to go have a dream and buy a business. You're not daydreaming. You're not just clicking at your computer at work, wasting everybody's time, for lack of better words.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same in real estate, right? Like if you were going to buy a house, like you show that real estate agent, I've been pre-approved for this type of loan. It's not that common, I would say, in the SBA space or in the SMB space to get pre-approved before you even submit an inquiry. Now, it's a great idea, but I think the barrier to submit like an inquiry on a listing is the lowest I've ever seen in like any other vertical. Like even, I don't know, Craigslist, like sometimes you have to make an account, or eBay, you have to make an account. This buy sell, you just go on, put in your email and your past email, and like that's it, and your name, and then you can inquire upon it, these listings.
Yeah,
every other industry vertical out there, the barrier to submit an inquiry is higher than this. So it would be great if every buyer is pre-approved when they press, inquire, but realistically, that's not the way the landscape's set up.
No, biz buy sell needs to be reined back in. I could have a whole 3 podcast episodes on my feelings about biz buy sell, and I think both of you know how I feel about that. But that's another day for another topic, and maybe we'll get back on that one. I'd like to have a little roasted biz buy sell. We talked about good things that a buyer's doing. Let's talk about some of the red flags and traits that buyers I think sometimes don't think about once they've kind of started a deal. I'll let Chris hit this one, but how often do we see analysis paralysis or due diligence too early?
Yeah. We got a lot of buyers that they start the process, they get into due diligence, and due diligence keeps going and going. Don't get me wrong. This is not the due diligence after an LOI has been submitted. This is due diligence of, hey, can you send me this one more P&L? Let me look at the 10-year balance sheet. I want to see what they were making back in 1990. It's like, what does that have to do with anything? But we get those kind of buyers, and they're looking for something wrong. And my thought, and this, I don't know this to be true, my thought is they're looking for something to find wrong with the business so they can say to themselves, I'm smarter than this business. I figured out what was wrong. I'm not buying it, because they want that. They want to escape that business. They love searching. That's why we call them searchers. But they want to find something wrong, and they love finding that, and so that they can back out of the deal and say, okay, I found out what was wrong. I'm not moving forward with that one. I see that all the time.
I'm with you, and I think George helps us with that a lot. We talk about Tupelo helping us facilitate NDAs and posting our listings online, but George, talk about the deal room a little bit and how that's really changed the industry, and having timelines, and how brokers use the deal room to help structure these conversations and really help some buyers move along the process instead of being stuck in document request.
Yeah, real quick, want to touch on that last point about like some buyers that make some errors here. I think it goes back to like understanding the market. A lot of times buyers are coming from like maybe larger banking operations or private equity, and they're used to looking at businesses where they have audited financial statements or CPA reviewed financial statements.
That's fair.
They don't understand that when you come down into this space, none of these businesses are getting audited financial statements. Like that's just not how the game works. Like, tax returns is the highest financial statement quality that we generally deal with. So understanding that from like day one puts you ahead of a lot of your competition. And then like what you're asking for really depends on like where you're at in that process. And again, this is not like a private equity, you're reviewing $100 million deal. Like the business owner and their team is not accustomed to having to provide that sort of information. They don't have like a CFO in place or anything like that. Literally what they're doing is they're taking your request and just forwarding it over to their bookkeeper to say, hey, can you pull this stuff
if
from
they have
QuickBooks?
That sometimes even.
Yeah. Can you pull this stuff from QuickBooks? So when a buyer comes in there and they have like a 30-page, due diligence request, I don't think they often realize how the receiver of that information is fetching that information. So that's like a really key point of how that stuff like, actually works behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Then to your point about like data rooms, like, yeah, brokers want to run a confidential sale process. If you're just like sending tax returns through your email, it's not the best way to run a confidential process. So like we created a data room inside of Tupelo for the brokers to request documentation from the business owners to be uploaded. They can organize it in whatever way they want, and then use that data room to share specific documents with prospective buyers and would-be lenders when that time comes. So a broker can manage their whole process from ingesting documentation. We have AI that'll do a first pass evaluation, spread the financial statements, and then when you're ready to share specific documents with prospective buyers and obviously would-be lenders, if they get into the equation, you can do that through Tupelo as well.
No, it's a great resource for us. It helps keep people online. And, and for some information, we can set timelines on how long that stuff is visible for. If you're a searcher, you don't need 2 months to review P&Ls and tax returns. And it also tells us here's a red flag, another one. If we send you a deal room link and you don't open it for 4 days and you're a serious buyer, that tells us very quickly you're not looking at the information. We know you're not going through the process. So when you come back with an email 5 days later, hey, I have a question about this. You didn't even look at all the files. like you didn't even look to do some basic homework before even coming back with that answer is possibly even in the deal room invitation we sent you. And that's, as a buyer, if you're listening, do your homework. If a broker sends you financial statements, read through them. And if you have questions, ask. Don't just look at one page of tax return and then move on. There is so much more in depth there. And if you don't know, get a CPA, ask for help. There's plenty of people out there that can help you better understand those numbers. Like George said, they're not always going to be audited and super easy and clean. They're Main Street books. But it's often a pretty explainable answer, and it's not something that's wrong per se either. It's not illegal. It's just not done the same way as Amazon versus Joe's Garage in New Orleans, Louisiana. If Joe doesn't have a bookkeeper, maybe Joe is doing QuickBooks by himself, not sure what he's categorizing correctly. The classic annotation, ask the accountant, right? How many times have we seen that in Main Street books? Like, the broker probably knows that answer because the broker, if he saw it when he was doing his diligence, is going to say, what is this $50,000 random charge? Ask the accountant. We can tell you.
Grant, I got a question on that.
Yes.
For you guys too. Like, if a buyer, like if you share a data room with a buyer and you're sharing financial statements with them, and a buyer asks like these questions, or like what type of questions do you receive from buyers where you're like, this person knows what they're doing?
Chris, you want to go first? You want me to go first?
I like when they ask, what's the annual CapEx? That tells me that they're really in depth. They're understanding this business, especially if it's a manufacturer or something like that. They want to know what the annual CapEx is. They expect me to know that, and I will, because I've had a discussion with my client about that before we even listed the business. If they ask first if they're cash or accrual financials, are they internal reporting? All those kind of questions, these in-depth questions that not hey, what does this business do? Well, you didn't even read the first page of the sim. Come on, guy. So yeah, when they're asking these really in-depth questions, it lets me know that they're serious buyers. They've looked at deals. They understand how this deal is going to work. If we talk about working capital early on, whether talking about it's an asset sale or stock sale, those are all great questions.
No, I would say trailing AR, what's going on with the AR, AP. I think that's a great, because a lot of times we've seen business where the AR doesn't change for 4 months because the owner doesn't update it. Like if a good, and that's the books we have to work with, right? A good buyer sees that, hey, why is the AR not changed for 5 months? Or why is the AP making random fluctuations throughout the year? Or where did depreciation go? I think those are all signs that you went and looked back at multiple years. You looked at a couple averages and said, okay, hey, I see some decent shifts here. What's the explanation? That's telling me they're looking for obvious reasons that the company is improving, declining, or in a shift state of change. Could they have a bunch of new equipment? Man, or did all the equipment get depreciated? How much can I redepreciate if I do an asset sale and help my bottom line? That's telling me they've got some financial savvy and they've thought about that part of the deal structure. So now I know where their thought process is going and how we can better help them too. Great question, George.
I guess it's a slippery slope there of like, right before we talked about having a due diligence list that's 30 pages, but then at that same token, as soon as you like open up and look at the financial statements, like I can see from a buyer's perspective, like why I would have, a bunch of different questions on that. So like, I guess governing those back to, 10, 5, whatever the top questions are, probably helps you guys out.
Absolutely. If someone gives us, like we talked about, 30 questions right away, some of the sellers we deal with, they're really good at running their businesses, but they're not accountants. And when you overwhelm them, they can psychologically lock up and they kind of get frustrated. And I don't think buyers always understand that. Yes, the seller knows you're taking a big risk to buy their business, but it doesn't mean you can dictate to them everything. The seller has a say in the transaction. It takes two to tango. And very often, I think buyers sometimes get, like under the red flag, is they get entitled to having answers to everything exactly how they want it. Sometimes there just isn't a good answer for a question. There's times like Chris could talk about, we've had sellers give us the wrong salary, what they're getting paying themselves even. And like, well, the broker did the multiple based on the salary add back, and you're trying to mislead me. No, the poor guy just didn't know. Like, it does happen. It really does. And as buyers, you have to have a bit of, take it a little grain of salt there that, sometimes these sellers don't know what they're doing. Their accountants go in and fix their books for them, and they just say, okay, I'll sign it. And they never really went back and read that top to bottom. And even sometimes we find errors that the accountants make. And we're like, hey, this isn't lining up. And we have to go back and get them redone. We had a daycare we were helping sell. They put grant revenue as gross sales, and it wasn't itemized. It was on no P&L, on the tax return, and it was a third of the revenue. But the owner didn't understand, okay, I've been making money every year. I haven't put any money in the company. It's not losing money. We're like, no, but go look at your balance sheet. You went from your cash reserve of 200 grand down to 30 over this year. You're burning through cash. But that grant money, you're not artificially supporting your payroll. Like, these are all things that a good buyer would notice. But too, for us, sometimes the accounting is just wrong, and you work with what you have. We've kind of covered the red flags there. I guess I kind of like to, George, if you could give some topics here from your side, advice for good brokers that they're listening, if they are listening, or sellers, how to identify, like, what are things you want to see in a good buyer? If, say you're in the seller's shoes, the broker's helping filter, but for a buyer to then meet the seller next, right? Sign NDA, financial form, buyer profile. We've cleared it. You make sense. Give some tips to buyers when they first meet that seller. I guess, and Chris, I'll let you give some tips too, but like, what are the first questions, the first interactions be like?
Yeah. So I think a big part of what I see like really successful brokers do here is before the buyer meets the seller, the broker is actually coming up with like a list of questions for the buyer themselves to be like, hey, during this interview process, these would be good questions to, have the seller answer. Give you a lot of clarity on, X, Y, and Z that you previously asked and you wanted to like drill deep into. But what I see good buyers doing during these processes is not making it it's more fluid. It's more of a conversation than like, tell me this, tell me this, tell me this, tell me this. So starting off with like, hey, how'd you get into this business?
Yep.
Talk to me about like what happened the last 3 years. How did you get through COVID? Things like that. A business owner, once you get them talking, like they'll talk for a good amount of time.
They will.
Because their business is their baby, right? It's a cliche, but they
true.
want to tell everyone about it. And once you get them going, it's just kind of pointing them in the right direction to get you the answers that you need. So it all starts, I think, with like, from a broker's perspective, trying to help the buyer structure a good interview. So like, these are good questions to ask. And then from a buyer's perspective and a broker kind of overseeing it all, like, let's try to make this more of a story rather than a Q&A.
I think that's so true, Chris. How often do we see the first question to buyers when they get in the room is, tell me about this expense you had in 2022 for $20,000, and it's like, you want to shoot yourself in the foot? I mean, come on, right?
No, it's like anything else. You got to build the relationship and build the trust. It's the worst thing ever when the seller walks through the door for the meeting and he immediately starts opening his notebook and he's got like 40 questions on one page, and then he flips the page, it's 40 more. It's like, that's not how this was going to go. So I usually tell sellers, I prepare them, or buyers, excuse me. I tell them, like, don't come in with every question. We'll get to all those, I promise. You just need to come in and talk to this guy. He's not ready. He's not going to be ready for all these financial questions. You can ask those to me. And if I don't know them, I will ask the bookkeeper or the CPA or whatever. It's really, you don't need to ask a lot of financial questions to a seller. That if they're a good business owner, they don't even know the answers to those detailed financial questions. They know what their revenue is. They can tell you 7 million or 8 million. They got that number memorized. They can probably tell you what they walked away with. They don't know what SDE is usually. They don't even know what net income is. They don't know what it is on their tax return. But they can tell you the highlights. But yeah, just come in and build that relationship. Hell, the best meetings I've ever had, we barely even talked about the business the first time we sat down. It was more about, hey, how'd you get started? And then it took off from there, and went into life stories and kids and grandkids and all that good stuff.
No, you're so right. One thing I would give advice to buyers too is don't talk about what you're going to offer the owner in the first meeting or the second meeting. Please do not say, "Oh, I'm going to put an offer in real soon."
Yeah.
Don't put yourself in that box, and especially if you do it, then don't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many times I've had buyers say that, and I just look across the room like, you just sunk yourself because you've now set that expectation that's not going to be met. Let me ask you this, George.
Yeah.
Do you have any metric data on how quickly inquiries come in to LOIs being flipped on a business that y'all brought to the table? Do y'all have that by chance? I know maybe it might be a very specific question, but I'm curious if you're tracking that.
Yeah, so we do track of like when a listing gets posted versus like when the broker updates it to LOI. I don't have that handy right now.
No, it's okay. My bad.
Yeah, no problem. I'll come with all that data next time. But I think
Specific questions that the owner
Yeah.
can know.
Yeah, my apologies there.
Yeah,
I went
you didn't listen to me.
I think it really depends like on the business is what it is. Like some businesses are just, it's in a hot industry right now. It's priced ready to sell. Like those don't last that much. They don't last that long on the market.
Yep.
And brokers will often like reference a term called pocket deals where like they'll have something that comes in. And I don't know, I don't necessarily think this is the best practice, but they'll have a buyer lined up for that specific deal. So yeah, it really depends. But if you look at the average time it takes to sell a business, it's anywhere from like 9 to 14 months, depending on the business.
Yeah, and I think that's very fair. I think sometimes buyers don't understand why a business has been on the market for 9 months. It takes time. Often there can be flaws with business. Oftentimes market conditions change, employees change. It's fluid, and that seller's looking for the right person. We talked about, Chris said it, building relationships. There's a lot of guys who are 30 years old who have an MBA think they figured out the business world. And this old savvy seller has been around through multiple market changes, shifts in demographics. He's ready to sell, but he also can tell when someone says, that guy cannot run my business or he's going to ruin it for my employees. I've had that conversation with many old school guys that just say, I've got two buyers. Buyer A is in the industry, maybe younger. Buyer B is not in the industry, but has a bunch of money. I'll take buyer A. I know he's going to take care of my people and he can run it right. And that does matter. And as a buyer, talk about doing your homework. How many memes do we see about guys who are 27-year-olds out of Harvard come find a random owner? Hey, I want to buy your business. What do you do again exactly? You make $1 million EBITDA? I'll buy it today. I've got capital backers. And that's something we didn't cover that I really want to get to. When you fill out the buyer profile and you say you have a partner or an investor, you might as well put all their information down too. Because if you tell a broker you've got a backer and he's got money in the sky and we don't see him, the first thing we're going to ask you is, where's your capital coming from? Who is it and how flexible are they? How often do you see these searchers, George, that claim to have backing, but in reality, they don't have that. They're looking just to get a deal on their contract and then go shop it, right? Which is what brokers cannot stand.
Yeah. So like if we just look at like pure noise on the internet, whether it's, X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it, or LinkedIn and people talking about search funds and things like that, like publicly, yes, they make more noise than anyone else out there, which is good, which is fine. But practicality, like we don't see searchers making up like search funds or ETAs making up a large portion of the buyer pool. The vast majority of buyers that we come across are not MBAs who've come out of one of these programs whatsoever. The reason why we hear about it is because they're active on the internet is what it boils down to. Now, what we see is if you do say you're like a searcher or an ETA or something like that, these are buzzwords that can turn off a lot of brokers. Meaning, like Brandon, like what you said, is they're thinking that the money you claim to have is not your money. So the broker is going to say, well, why am I talking to you, not the person who has the money and is going to be financing that business?
Which is fair.
So if I was this minority of buyers that are like ETAs or searchers, I would not always lead with that information. Now, I want to be honest with the brokers, but at the same token, like I don't want to turn off the brokers from every opportunity. And I'd also want to be very close with my investors. So if I do find an opportunity, one, I'm highly confident that they're going to back it. And they've been in the search the whole entire loop.
That's a fair point. Often we see them say they have capital and then they get a LOI, then they start talking to 2 or 3 different groups that have claimed they want to back them. And I've yet to see one of those deals really go through that I've been associated with. I know they have, but it's not that many. And unfortunately, like you said, the noise on the internet has inspired a lot of people to dive feet first. Let me ask you this, George. I know Chris and I have seen this, but are there any groups out there that you think are, you don't have to name names here, that are advertising, giving, or selling? What are the false narratives you see being sold to searchers or even as private individuals who are, at that 35, 40 age mark looking to do things on their own, that you would say, watch out for these, I guess, buzzwords those groups are using before you go dive in and get educated, as they like to tell you, or buy a boring business?
Yeah, no money down. Anytime I see something with no money down, like you can buy a cash flow business with no money down, like that's it's like, I'm not saying it'll never happen, but it doesn't really happen. Very, very far and few between. And then like where the owner's not involved in the business, you can just buy this business, never be there. And then it just cash flows you money. Like that doesn't really happen that much. Usually when you buy a business, no matter the size, you're going to be like living in it for the foreseeable future. And yeah, once you get like a good general manager in place and you understand the business inside and out, you're able to take a reduced role. But there's no one that buys a business and then is just like, all right, let's just have the money hit my bank account and I'm good to go. Let's buy another one.
Why wouldn't we buy it, right? I mean, why wouldn't Chris or I buy it? If that was a listing, why wouldn't we buy it? I mean, let's be realistic.
Yeah. It's hard. Like, it's not easy to find a good business to buy and then to buy a business and then run it and execute it. And like you as a buyer oftentimes are taking on more risk nearly all of the time when you're buying a business. So let's say you have a stable W-2 and it's paying you X. If you're buying a business, yeah, the upside is a lot higher, but the risk is also a lot larger as well. So like understanding those dynamics when you get into the space, I think is important.
That's a great point, because we see a lot of W-2s, Chris, that guys that have very good paying jobs. We could probably name a couple offhand that we know inquire on all our listings here in the area that could probably do it psychologically. Not sure they have the guts to do it or willingness, but it's like, man, you're talking about taking like a $4 to $5 million note out. If you're going through SBA, you got to put a lien on your house. You're going to leave a $300,000 to $400,000 W-2 job, take a full risk. I mean, I know my wife, she would probably have a panic attack if I did that. How would yours handle it, Chris? Because we've talked to our wives about that. And even we've had those discussions that don't always go so smoothly.
No, absolutely. We've talked about, asking buyers for their profile and asking how much cash they have on hand. That is important, right? It qualifies them for what type of business they can buy through the SBA. What we haven't touched on is how much debt are you willing to take on? And have you really thought that out? It's hard to put that on a buyer profile, but it really should be there, because having that conversation with your wife of, hey, I'm going to go borrow $5 million from the SBA and our note's going to be about $700,000 a year in debt service. That doesn't go over too well usually, especially if you're inquiring about an industry you've got no knowledge about. You try to take to your wife that, hey, but it makes $1 million EBITDA. Yeah, but you said $700,000 debt service, so we're doing all this to possibly pull out $300,000, and you're making $350 as vice president of X communications. It's like it doesn't really make sense. But I don't think that logic has come through yet. They've got the YouTube videos, they've got whatever they've got access to, and they're going off that. They're like, I got to find this $1 million EBITDA. Apparently, that's how I build wealth in this country. So, but yeah, think through the debt financing and the risk that you're really on a journey to take.
Absolutely. And let me ask you this, George. It's kind of a little off topic, but it's something I think you have great insight on that I'd love to see your pitch to buyers is when scrolling and looking at listings. Obviously, Tupelo has all our listings on there, and you feed us to multiple different business for sale sites, mostly the big ones that matter. What are things you would like for buyers to look for in actual listings that are ones they should inquire? I know you have to understand your specific niche, but when a listing's written up by a broker, what are ones you say, hey, that's one you should really inquire on, even if you're not sure, because the way it's designed, the way it's written, the way it's structured, that broker is prepped that one actually to sell versus the 3 sentences, slap it on biz by sell, and just pray that someone clicks to buy it. I think that's something we've not talked about in any of our other podcasts, but you can give great insight because you've seen thousands of listings.
Yeah. So just the way these listing sites are structured, it's it's tough for the buyers. Like, quite frankly, it's
It
tough for the
is.
buyers.
Because you're
They
keeping
get,
confidentiality, right? Like, let's be honest. It's hard to write a blind confidential profile. For all the buyers out there, we're sorry. We can't tell you exactly what it is. We're a little hamstrung. Sorry.
but even from like the metrics that are displayed, the buyer gets 1 year of revenue. Okay, great. Then they get cash flow, which nobody knows what that number actually means. Is it EBITDA? Is it
No
SDE?
disclaimer
Is
what was added to it.
it
Yeah.
is it cash flow? And then there's a few other metrics down there, but like that's really in location, which can be like a region, it can be a state, it can be,
That's true.
it's not the specific address. Industry, again, like industry, I know there's a finite number of industries, and then every business doesn't fit that finite. Because like from the broker's shoes, they're given a list of industries to choose from to post their listings to. So like if it is a injection mold company, oftentimes there's not like a headline that says injection mold company. They'll have
Yes.
to choose like other manufacturing.
Or environmental
So
services or something. Yeah, it's tough.
yeah. So from the buyer who's like scrolling to like look at these businesses, it's tough. The things that I would look for, and again, this information is not on every listing. When was the business founded? How long has it been around? And when was it founded? The industry, is it sort of in my strike zone, or is it in my strike zone? And then do the financial criterias, the price, the revenue, cash flow, which is generally SDE. Like, can I afford it? And if it checks those three, then I'm going to move forward in the process, because a lot of times brokers don't spend that much time writing these listing descriptions up. And now that they're putting it into ChatGPT and things like that, like it's just kind of like AI driven. I feel like it's all going towards, there's not too much value in that description. So
I think you make a good point there. The AI driving a lot of the new content of those descriptions. But I would say if you find a description that's been you can tell it's not just generic talk, but handwritten, and there's extra notes, and they've gone through that description and added bullet points and added key notes. Their broker's sending you a message that this business has been well prepped, screened, and understood. Better than a generic stock photo with 1-to-1 ratio asking price to cash flow, claiming to be this great opportunity. If it's too good to be true, often it probably is. So for whatever that's worth, that's my fight on Biz Buy Sell. We'll have that discussion another day.
Yeah, I mean, it's every marketplace out there right now.
No, it's not.
Like in a perfect world, there's probably 3 years of metrics there that they can analyze to see some sort of trajectory. Obviously, not all brokers will put that information in there because they don't want to like share that the business might be a little bit lumpy.
Up or down.
Yeah, so I get that from their perspective, but I also understand from the buyer's perspective, like the reason why I'm putting in 20 inquiries is because I'm not given much information, so I have to put in these inquiries to find the information. So like again, like when was the business founded? Industry doesn't make sense, and can I afford that business? If it's checking those 3 boxes, like it's fine, in my opinion, to inquire upon this business.
Yeah, all fair points. I think we've covered a lot of great stuff today. We appreciate your insights, George. I know it's weird seeing it from different platforms. We as brokers see a lot from different angles, buyers, and same for you as being kind of a middleman to some degree with technology, especially with the change in technology. Being a younger person like myself, we see it through a real different lens: the pre-digital, post-digital, how communication's changing, email communication. Everything's changing. But if anything, buyers, if you're listening today, take the key talking points we spoke about. Think about your process, do your homework. And if you really have questions about the homework, reach out to someone like George, Chris, or myself and say, hey, I'm looking to do something. How can I best connect, but also be able to move when the time is right and pre-qualify myself? Because like in any industry, any part of life, if you don't prepare and you're not doing your homework and you say you want to move, people who are going to have those decisions to make with you, they're going to put you in a different class than those that they know have done their homework. So everybody, I thank you for being here today, Chris, George. I'm Brandon. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us. George, if you want to drop where they can find you all online, if they're interested in your services or just want to talk to you, what's a good way to reach you, George?
George at TupeloSMB.com. Just go to our website, TupeloSMB.com, and click the button. Find out more.
And if you're a serious buyer, they've got a lot of great listings on there. And these are from a site that is the brokers pay to be on and actually put their listing information into. So if you're looking for probably pretty high quality listings, They're there
Yeah, we
because
have
they're
over 5,000 listings. Over 5,000 listings. Yeah.
5,000. You can go some randoms like Biz Buy Sell and find junk, and other sites and find junk that people just can randomly slap on there with no qualification. These are all brokers that are paying George for his help. So if you're a serious buyer, look at Tupelo. On that note, thank you for watching the Steps to Soul podcast. We will see y'all next week. Everybody, great talking to you.